There is a battlefield where no army has ever marched, a place where entire empires crumble without a single drop of blood being spilled. This battlefield does not lie on the plains of history, but within the labyrinthine corridors of the human psyche. And at this very moment, as you breathe, a silent war is being waged inside you. The question that should keep you awake at night is not, "Who are my enemies?" but rather, "Why did I give them the power to destroy me?" Carl Gustav Jung was not merely a Swiss psychiatrist who diverged from Freud. He was an explorer of the hidden dimensions of consciousness, a cartographer of the uncharted territory we call the unconscious. And through decades of working with lives shattered by suffering, he identified a devastating pattern. Most human beings live in a psychological prison whose key lies in their own hands, yet they cannot see it. Have you ever felt annihilated by a casual word? Destroyed by rejection? Betrayed and unable to trust again? These are not external attacks. They are echoes of something far deeper and more sinister. Jung understood that when someone wounds you easily, it is not because that person is powerful. It is because you have an open wound that has never healed, waiting to be touched. Modern society has turned you into an emotional beggar, pleading for validation, terrified of others' opinions, dependent on external approval to feel that your existence has value. This is the most sophisticated form of slavery ever invented, and Jung devoted his life to forging the keys to this liberation. In the next 20 minutes, you will not receive shallow self-help advice. There will be no empty mantras or childish positive affirmations. What you are about to experience is a guided descent into the basements of Jungian analytical psychology, from which we will extract 5 alchemical principles that will completely transform your relationship with pain, rejection, and betrayal. By the end of this journey, you will understand why no word, no rejection, and no betrayal will ever be able to destroy you again. Not because you will become numb, but because you will have done something far more radical. You will have integrated your own darkness. But I must warn you, this knowledge demands brutal courage, because you will discover that the true adversary was never out there. He has always been staring back at you through the mirror. Prepare to meet your shadow. First Jungian law of psychological invulnerability. That which you reject in yourself becomes the most effective weapon others can use against you. Or put more directly, you can only be destroyed by the truths about yourself that you refuse to face. Jung called this the shadow, not an external force, but the sum of all aspects of your personality that you deemed unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous, and banished to the basement of the unconscious. There, these aspects do not die. They grow stronger in the darkness, gain autonomy, and begin to control you in ways your conscious mind doesn't even perceive. When someone calls you arrogant and you explode with anger, it's not because the accusation is false. It's because they touch something you buried so deeply that even a mention of it threatens the entire artificial structure of who you believe yourself to be. Anger is not a defense against a lie. It is panic in the face of a truth you never had the courage to confront. Jung understood that the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection. Every saint has a sleeping demon. Every hero has a coward whispering in their ear. The question was never to eliminate these parts. It was to acknowledge them, name them, integrate them. Because what you refuse to face within yourself will be forced upon you in the external world, projected onto others. There is an ancient story Jung often cited, the myth of Bellerophon and the Chimera. Bellerophon was a Greek hero, handsome, talented, admired. He killed the Chimera while riding the winged horse Pegasus and was celebrated throughout the kingdom. But the victory fed something dangerous in his psyche, hybris, excessive pride. Bellerophon began to believe he was more than human. In his arrogance, he decided to ride Pegasus to Mount Olympus to sit among the gods. Zeus, witnessing this transgression, sent a simple fly to sting Pegasus. The horse panicked. Bellerophon fell and spent the rest of his days wandering alone, lame, blind, and despised. consumed by the very arrogance he refused to recognize when it was only a shadow. What destroyed Bellerophon? It was not Zeus. It was not the fly. It was the part of himself he inflated to grotesque proportions because he never had the humility to acknowledge his own limitations. He projected his grandiosity onto the external world, and the external world returned it shattered. Observe the world around you. That colleague who makes a comment about your work, and you can't sleep for 3 nights. It is not the comment that tortures you. It is the unacknowledged suspicion that perhaps they are right. The romantic rejection that paralyzes you for months is not about the person who rejected you. It is about the confirmation of a subterranean belief you carry. I am not worthy of being loved. On social media, this is magnified. People crumble under criticism, an unfollow, a lack of likes. Why? Because they built a persona, a social mask, so far removed from who they really are that any threat to that facade becomes an existential threat. Shadow integration exercise. Identify 3 traits in other people that provoke intense emotional reactions: anger, disgust, envy. Write them down. Now, with brutal honesty, ask yourself, where, to what degree, and in what disguised way do I also manifest this trait? The answer you resist the most is precisely where your shadow is hiding. Acknowledge it, name it, and then it loses the power to be used against you. Second Jungian law of psychological invulnerability. The tension between opposites should not be eliminated, but consciously maintained until a third position emerges. Or more simply, your pain is the raw material of your transformation. Jung discovered something that medieval alchemists intuitively knew. True transformation does not occur by denying one pole in favor of the other, but by consciously holding both opposites simultaneously. He called this the transcendent function. When you are betrayed, there is unbearable tension, the part of you that wants to trust again, and the part that has vowed never to be vulnerable. Most people resolve this by picking a side. They either become hardened cynics who never open up again, or perpetual naïfs who repeat the same destructive patterns. Jung proposed something radically different. Remain in the tension. Do not flee to either extreme. Consciously hold the pain of betrayal and the need for human connection, without allowing one side to eliminate the other. In this space of creative tension, something new is born: discerning wisdom. You become someone who can trust without being naive, who can protect yourself without completely closing off. Consider the story of Job from the Old Testament, which Jung analyzed extensively in Answer to Job. Job was a righteous, faithful, prosperous man. In a single day, he loses everything. His children die, his wealth disappears, his body is covered in painful sores. His friends arrive and offer the typical solutions. You must have sinned. God is punishing you. Repent. But Job refuses these simplistic explanations. He does not deny his pain by saying, everything happens for a reason. Nor does he curse God and give up on life. He remains in the unbearable tension between his faith and his suffering. And it is precisely in this tension, in this place of total disorientation, where all his old certainties have been destroyed, that Job experiences the divine directly. Not answers, not explanations, but a fundamental transformation of consciousness. He emerges not as the man he was before, but as something qualitatively different, someone who has faced the abyss and was not annihilated by it. You are in a relationship that ends abruptly. Rejection burns like acid. The immediate impulse is either to convince yourself that there are plenty of fish in the sea and force a false positivity, or to decide that all people are the same and shut down emotionally. Both are escapes from the real tension. The transcendent function requires that you remain present to the full pain of loss and to the persistent hope of future connection. You do not minimize either. You hold both simultaneously, like burning coals in your hands, until something new crystallizes. A deep understanding of your relational patterns, clarity about what you truly need, an expanded capacity to love that includes but transcends this particular loss. When confronted with acute pain, rejection, betrayal, humiliation, resist the impulse to resolve it quickly with explanations or distractions. Dedicate 15 minutes daily to sit with the tension. Write in 2 columns. On one side, everything the situation has awakened in you that is painful. On the other, what it may be teaching you about patterns you need to change. Do not force a synthesis. Simply keep both perspectives alive. Transformation happens naturally when you stop running. Third Jungian law of psychological invulnerability. You can only be wounded by the opinions of others to the extent that you have no opinion of your own about yourself. Individuation is the process of developing an unshakable inner center. Jung devoted his entire later work to the concept of individuation, the process by which an individual becomes psychologically indivisible, an integrated whole. This does not mean social isolation or narcissistic selfishness. It means something much deeper: the separation between your essential identity and the collective identifications imposed upon you by family, culture, religion, and society. Most people do not have a true self. They have a collage of parental expectations, cultural mandates, social roles, and uncritically absorbed opinions. When someone attacks this fragile construction, the entire structure threatens to collapse because there is no real foundation beneath it. The process of individuation is painful because it requires that you betray collective expectations. Your parents expected you to be a lawyer, but you are an artist. Your culture says men don't cry, but you need access to vulnerability to be whole. Your religion promised absolute certainties, but you discovered you can live comfortably with mystery. Every step toward your authentic truth is a step away from the herd, and the herd punishes dissidents. The story of Socrates is archetypal here. In Athens, 5th century BCE, Socrates wandered the streets asking uncomfortable questions. He did not accept society's ready-made answers. When asked about piety, justice, or courage, he demonstrated that no one really knew what they were talking about. They were merely repeating what they had heard. Socrates developed a radical method, the daimonion, an inner voice that guided him. It was not the voice of the Olympian gods everyone worshipped. It was something deeper, an internal moral compass. When the city of Athens accused him of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, they offered him a choice: exile or death. He could have simply left the city and lived comfortably elsewhere. His friends begged him, but Socrates refused. Why? Because yielding would have meant betraying that inner voice. It would have meant admitting that the city's collective judgment was more valid than his own integrated conscience. He drank the hemlock, but died as a complete individual, not as a fragment of others' opinions. Jung saw Socrates as the perfect example of individuation, a man who developed a center so solid that not even a death sentence could shake him. He was not invulnerable because he was insensitive. He was invulnerable because he knew exactly who he was, regardless of what others thought of him. In the modern corporate world, you see the opposite. Executives who are in fortunes yet are terrified of losing status. Influencers with millions of followers who collapse under a wave of criticism. Why? Because they built their entire identities on external foundations: titles, salaries, follower counts, public validation. When your source of identity is external, you become a permanent hostage to the world's fluctuations. One day you are praised, the next you are canceled. And in both cases, you have no idea who you really are. The individuated individual, in the Jungian sense, can lose everything and remain intact internally, not because they do not care, but because their source of value is not in the fleeting opinions of the masses. It is in a deep relationship with themselves, forged through years of brutal and honest self-examination. Define a personal code. Identify 5 non-negotiable principles that define who you are, regardless of external approval. They should not be vague, be good. They must be specific and testable. Example: I tell the truth even when it is inconvenient. When a situation arises where following this principle costs social approval, you have your opportunity for individuation. Each time you choose your internal truth over external validation, you strengthen the unshakable center that no other person's words can penetrate. Let us take a moment to integrate what has been revealed so far. You have grasped three alchemical foundations of psychological invulnerability. First, your deepest wounds arise from the parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge. The shadow you rejected now becomes the weapon others wield against you. Second, pain must not be avoided or denied, but consciously held until it transmutes into wisdom, the transcendent function that turns poison into medicine. Third, you can only be destroyed by the opinions of others to the extent that you have not developed an opinion of your own about yourself. Individuation that forges an unshakable center. But these are only the defensive fundamentals, the psychological armor that protects you from attacks. Now, we enter more dangerous territory. The next two laws are not for those who seek merely to survive, but for those who have chosen to completely transform the nature of their relationship with human suffering. What you are about to learn is not found in self-help books. These are teachings Jung reserved for his most advanced patients, those who demonstrated the courage to look directly into the abyss. Because these tactics do not soften reality, they intensify it. Prepare yourself. Fourth Jungian law of psychological invulnerability. Everything that is repressed to the extreme turns into its opposite. The deepest betrayal liberates the most authentic love. The most devastating rejection reveals the most genuine value. This is the principle of enantiodromia, the course toward the opposite. Jung borrowed this concept from Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher who understood that reality is a perpetual flow of opposites. But Jung deepened it psychologically. When any conscious attitude is maintained unilaterally and developed to the extreme, it inevitably converts into its opposite in the unconscious, eventually erupting into consciousness with compensatory force. Consider, the man who prides himself on being supremely rational eventually suffers an emotional collapse. The woman who devotes all her energy to caring for others is eventually consumed by selfish anger. The compulsive optimist experiences profound depression. It is not punishment. It is the psyche seeking balance through compensation. But here is the dangerous knowledge. If you understand this principle, you can use it consciously. When you experience the most brutal betrayal, the most humiliating rejection, the complete destruction of your persona, you are not at rock bottom. You are on the brink of an enantiodromia, a complete transformation into something new. The question is, will you have enough awareness to ride this wave of transformation, or will you be swept away by it? The most powerful narrative of this principle comes from the myth of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess. Inanna was queen of the heavens, powerful, adored, radiant. But she decided to do something no god had done, descend into the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, Inanna was forced to remove a piece of her divine attire, a symbol of her power, her crown, her necklace, her royal robe, piece by piece, until she reached Ereshkigal's throne completely naked, stripped of all divinity. And then Ereshkigal killed her, fixing the gaze of death upon her and hanging her on a hook, a corpse rotting in the dark. For 3 days and 3 nights, Inanna remained dead. But then, through a divine stratagem, she was resurrected. When she returned to the upper world, she was no longer the same goddess. She had died completely, experienced total annihilation, and been reborn with an understanding no god who had only stayed in the heavens could possess. She now knew both light and darkness. She had become whole. Jung saw this myth as a map of radical psychological transformation. Betrayal strips you of your illusions about trust. Rejection forces you to remove the masks of who you thought you should be. Public humiliation tears away all the garments of your social persona. And if you descend consciously, if you allow the complete death of the old self without resistance, something extraordinary happens. You are reborn, not as a patched-up version of who you were, but as something qualitatively new. You go through a devastating divorce, not just the end of a marriage, but the total destruction of the narrative you built around your life. The house, the plans, your identity as a married person, everything collapses. Most people try to rebuild as quickly as possible, a new relationship, a move, anything to fill the void. But if you understand enantiodromia, you do something radically different. You allow the complete descent. You sit in the void. You let the old identity die fully, without trying to resurrect it artificially. You remain at the threshold between who you were and who you will become, even if that threshold is pure terror and disorientation. And then, in a moment that cannot be forced or predicted, something new emerges. Not the old you restored, something deeper. A you who has integrated the experience of psychological death and now carries a depth that those who never descended will never possess. People sense it in you, even without understanding. You have become someone who has met the abyss. When you experience psychological destruction, betrayal, public failure, devastating loss, ask yourself, which version of myself is dying here? Identify specifically which identity, which belief about yourself, which social role is being annihilated. Then consciously allow it to die. Do not try to save it. Create a symbolic ritual. Write a letter to the old you acknowledging its death. Burn it. And then wait, without rushing, for the rebirth. It will come, but only if you do not prematurely abort the process by trying to return to what you were before. Fifth and supreme Jungian law: you will never be completely invulnerable, and that is precisely your greatest strength. The goal is not to build an impenetrable fortress, but to dissolve the illusion that you are merely the small ego that must be defended. Jung distinguished the ego, the limited, fragile, mortal center of consciousness, from a self, the core of psychic totality, encompassing both conscious and unconscious. Suffering arises from exclusive identification with the ego, as if you were only a single wave in the ocean, afraid of disappearing. The self, however, is invulnerable and transcends the ego. Living from the self allows you to feel pain and rejection without being destroyed. It is like waking from a dream. The attacks in the dream were real, but you realize you are far more than the character being pursued. Jung experienced this radically in 1913 during a psychotic collapse. Instead of succumbing, he used active imagination to dialogue with emerging figures, recording them in his Red Book. He did not emerge cured, but transformed, recognizing the ego as only a small part of something greater. This understanding changed his relationship with suffering and criticism, including betrayals and false accusations during the rise of Nazism. Today, over-identification with the ego is reinforced by social media, criticism, and rejection, causing deep suffering. Yet we have all experienced countless deaths: childhood, adolescence, relationships, beliefs, and something deeper remained: the self. Recognizing this dimension diminishes the impact of external judgments, not by making you insensitive, but by putting them into perspective. The Jungian practice of active imagination helps reveal that what is wounded is only a part, a subpersonality or complex, while the deeper observer, the self, remains untouched. True invulnerability comes when you abandon the need to be invulnerable, understanding that the small ego was never the totality of who you are, only a wave on the vast ocean. Now my invitation to you, who had the courage to stay with me until the end of this journey. In the comments below, share which of these 5 laws resonates most deeply with your current life experience. Not a superficial comment, a genuine reflection. Which of these principles arrived as a revelation? Which have you already been living without knowing how to name them? Which scares you the most to implement? Your answer is not just for me, it is for yourself. A public commitment to your own transformation. If this exploration of Jungian depth psychology stirred something within you, if you understand that there are truths about human nature that aren't discussed in shallow conversations, then subscribe to this channel. because we will continue descending into these territories, into dangerous philosophies, deep psychologies, and knowledge that demands intellectual and emotional courage to confront. And if you felt the weight of these words, if something in you recognized the truth in these ideas, even when they were uncomfortable, leave a like. Not for me, but as a marker for yourself. On this day, I chose the path of consciousness. I chose not to live anymore as a terrified fragment, but as the totality I have always been. Carl Jung once wrote, "The unexamined life is a disease from which one can die." No word, no rejection, no betrayal will destroy you again. Not because you built impenetrable walls, but because you have finally understood that within you exists something far vaster, deeper, and more resilient than anything external could touch. This is the promise of individuation. This is Jung's legacy. And now, this knowledge is in your hands. Until the next descent,